What happens when you join a new company, or you change a team, or a project, or you want to contribute to an open source project? How much does it take to be up and running? Is it a minute? Is it an hour? Is it a day? Sometimes a week. Wouldn't it be nice to have an instant full development environment that does not eat your laptop resources? Wouldn't it be great to be able to start developing any project without any setup instantly? Imagine being able to say magic words. Repeat after me. I want to work on that project. And poof, a moment later, everything is set up. You can just start writing code. There's nothing else for you to do, nothing to install, nothing to set up. Just write code because environment is with all the tools, all configured. Everything is up and running almost instantly. Now, to be honest, the tools and services to get instant development environments have been around for a while. We have GitHub and we have Octeto and quite a few others. And by the way, if you want to see the videos of GitHub and Octeto, there you go. You should watch them. Both are amazing tools. But today I want to undo a bad thing that I did or overlooked. I did not explore GitHub Codespaces, partly because it was closed beta and then it was open beta, and now nobody knows what's the status of GitHub Codespaces. But I'm going off the rails. What matters is that I want to explore today GitHub Codespaces and see whether that's something that I should use, whether that's something that you should be using. So what is it? Well, it's easy to explain. A GitHub Codespace is a development environment that's hosted in the cloud. Now let's see how it works. Let's start by taking a look at one of my repositories. Actually a repository, GitHub repository that I created specifically for this demo. It's a silly one. Most of my demos are silly. What can you do? Anyways, I will use GH CLI or GitHub CLI. And the reason why I'm doing that, first of all, because it's really great. You should be using it as well. It will help me open my repository in a browser so that I can show you the repository. And the third reason is because GH or GitHub CLI is one of the ways you can create code spaces, among others. So GH repo view, the organization, which is in my case mine, in your case yours, if you fork my repo, and then Codespaces demo, and I want to explore it in a browser. By the way, if you haven't used GitHub CLI, if you're not familiar with it, then maybe you want to watch this video over there, which shows how to use GitHub CLI and why you should use it. So here's my repository in a browser, and there is that button code. You saw that button. That button was there forever, but there is something special about that button that you might have missed, or you might not even have. If you haven't enabled Codespaces, then do that. Actually, I'm not sure whether you can do it or not, because I'm not sure. The status of Codespaces is a weird thing. Some people can use it, some don't. It's invite, not invite, who knows. Anyways, in the code pop-up, you can choose to code locally or in Codespaces. And if you choose Codespaces, and you should, at least for this demo, then you have the button Create Codespace on main. Doesn't have to be on the main branch, but that's the only branch I have. So that's the one we're going to use today. And the moment you click that button, a new window appears. It is setting up the development environment, or what GitHub calls Codespace. And we can choose to stay in this browser or to click that new button that says, hey, do you want to open it in a local Visual Studio Code? I will stick with the browser because I will switch to Visual Studio Code in a second and show another way to create Codespaces. Codespace, actually. Codespaces can have many code spaces, so that's strange to say. Anyways, this is the browser, and now once it's set up the Codespace, it shows me Visual Studio Code in a browser, right? This works almost the same as Visual Studio Code, even though it's a bit messed up, right? Because browser is not the same thing as desktop. Some shortcuts are really conflicting with shortcuts of browsers and so on and so forth. Personally, I love the idea of remote development environments. I love it. I think it's absolutely brilliant, but I'm not 100% sure that I like Visual Studio Code in a browser. I think it's great if I'm at the airport and I might want to do something from a tablet or a Chromebook or something like that. But I personally prefer to work in Visual Studio Code, install the desktop version, not browser. So I'm going to switch to my desktop Visual Studio Code, and you should know that almost everything can be done in either. So it's your choice to use browser version or desktop version of Visual Studio Code, or not use it at all. That would be silly, because Visual Studio Code is awesome. Anyways, Codespaces work in both, so it's up to you. I'm going to desktop. Now let me start over to show another way how we can create a Codespace, a development environment. If you installed GitHub Codespaces plugin, which you should, or I think it's called extension, let's say, then you have that button that says somewhere in the middle to open remote something, and one of that remote something is Codespaces. And if you click on the plus icon, you will see a pop-up with a list of all the Git repositories that you own. I'm going to select Codespaces demo, and oh, I forgot, I always forget, there is a gist with all the commands and instructions if you want to follow along. If not, just continue watching. Anyways, I'm going to select Codespaces demo repository, which is a silly demo that I created for this demo. Silly demo for the demo. That doesn't make sense. Anyways, I'm going to select that repository, and let's see what will happen. And there we go. I have my project in Visual Studio Code on my desktop, but fully remote. So everything except Visual Studio Code is somewhere else. It's in the clouds, right? So a development environment with all the tools that I might need. And if some tools are missing, I will show you later how you can add additional tools, reconfigure, fine-tune it if you want to. But very often, very often, it works out of the box pretty well. And to prove that it's working, this is a silly Go code, silly Go application, so I can execute in the terminal. And remember, this is all happening remote. It's in cloud, except that Visual Studio Code is local in the desktop, and I can execute something like go run main.go to run my application. And there we go. I got the message saying, hey, this application seems to be using port 8080. And would you like maybe to open it in a browser on that port? Is that what you really want? And I like to follow along, and I will say, yes, let's do it. Let's open it in a browser. Let's see this fancy application in action. Remember, everything is happening remote except Visual Studio Code in this case. There you go. That's the fancy application. It says this is a silly demo. Let's see what else can we do. I just want to make sure that this works like a normal local environment, except that it's remote. It is in cloud, right? So I'm going to change the source code, the simulate that I'm working right now. I'm going to change this is a silly whatever message into Codespaces something, and then I'm going to save that change. I'm going to stop the binary that is running right now from a terminal and execute it again. Now, in a real world situation, I would probably have some kind of a cron, some kind of a tool that would do hot reload instead of Control C and then start it again. But this is a silly demo. Let's start the application again and then go back to the browser, refresh the browser, and there we go. Codespaces, is it worth it? That's a question that I'm going to answer later, maybe, if I'm in a good mood. Now let's see what else can we do. Actually, what else can we do is basically whatever you need to do to develop, as long as the tools that you need are available. We can check, is there Git? Of course, there is Git. I can see the status and so on and so forth. So this is a full development environment running somewhere else. Pretty awesome. Now, you might say, hey, there are some things missing. I would like to fine-tune it to make it especially special for my own needs. I might need additional tools or additional config files or additional processes to start with when the environment was created and so on and so forth. And we can do that. We can go to Codespace Configure and then choose one of the options. In this case, I will say from predefined container configuration definition or whatever it says there. It can be from Dockerfile, or it can be, no, those are the two options, right? It can be predefined or Dockerfile, and we can fine-tune either of the two. So let's go with the first option. So, container configuration definition, it already created actually a selection of those that are more likely to be appropriate for my project. I can browse all definitions. I'm too lazy to do that. I will select one of those that are that it guessed I might want to use. What should I go for? Let's say Go and PostgreSQL. I mean, this application doesn't need Postgres, but imagine that it does. So I'm going to select that option, and then I'm guided through a wizard to the completion of this setup. I need to select Go version, whichever I want to use, latest or specific one. For some unknown reason, I should select Node.js. I think that's what Codespaces itself need. Maybe it gets confused, doesn't matter. Let's select any. And then I can choose additional features. And there are quite a few over there. I can choose to have AWS CLI or Azure CLI or Docker or so on and so forth, right? There are quite a few tools I can choose from, and they will be baked into my Codespace environment, this one or the next one, or whenever I create an environment based on that project, because as you will see soon, this is a file that I can store in the GitHub repository so that from there on it knows that those are the specifics that I need. I'm also asked to select Git version and kubectl version, and if I selected more tools, I would be asked more questions and so on and so forth, and then I finish the wizard, finish the setup, and the result is that I got dev container JSON file and a few other files, and that contains all the choices that I already made, and I could continue extending this file. I could fine-tune it by writing this JSON. Why JSON? I hate JSON. That doesn't matter. Anyways, I can now use this JSON to store it in Git, so that every time I create a new code space, it's based on that JSON, and I can modify it to further fine-tune what I need. Now, since Codespaces are effectively virtual machines somewhere in cloud, in Azure, obviously, and inside of those virtual machines, we have containers that have all the tools. Actually, not containers, one container that has all the tools. Right now, it is asking me, hey, do you want to rebuild it? Is it rebuild it? Yes, rebuild it now, right? Because it needs to recreate that container based on the choices that I just made. And I am an easygoing person. I will say, yes, let's do that. And there we go. I almost got a new environment. It showed some errors. I'm going to ignore those errors because this is still beta version. It's not still final version. I will pretend that I haven't seen the issues and say, hey, I got a new environment based on the specification that I set. There is also Docker Compose because GitHub folks do not understand yet that we should be using Kubernetes and not Docker Compose. But hey, Docker Compose that spins up container or containers depending on what we selected, and the container, the main development container, is specified in Docker file. And that's the gist of Codespaces. Now, of course, there are many other things you could do, but that's the meat of it, right? We can personalize Codespaces, we can synchronize the settings from local Visual Studio Code to the remote one and vice versa, which is kind of cool because it makes it easier, right? I can start right away remotely working in Visual Studio Code in a browser using all the shortcuts and everything that I have used locally in my laptop, which is absolutely awesome. We can use dot files that have configurations and specification, whatever we want to have in that environment. If you're used to dot files in your own laptop, you will love this. If not, then you should learn what dot files are. I'm not going to go through it right now, but only say that you can personalize stuff with it. You can set up what's happening on install, on Bootstrap, on teardown, and so on and so forth. So there are different types of dot files that Codespaces uses by default, if there are any. So this is how you set really what should happen, when should happen, if you have a need to specify those things. Then we have secrets. Secrets can be encrypted and used from Codespaces, which is absolutely necessary because a Codespace is usually one application, and that application often needs to talk with other applications. And how do we do that? With secrets. So that's absolutely necessary, and that's already there. Big thumbs up for that. And then we get to pricing. Pricing is, well, it looks like it's cheap, right? Oh, price 18 cents for 2 cores per hour. But actually, this is expensive. This is more expensive than competition, which makes sense because, hey, it's Microsoft. Microsoft is huge and can charge whatever they want. But this is one of the things you might want to consider. Is it worth the price? We're going to get back to that question later. For now, what matters is that unless it is a private repository, your personal repository, I think it can be public or private. If it's for an organization, you need to pay money. This is not free. And it's normal. Nothing should be free. I mean, something should be free, but also companies should earn some money, and those are the prices. But it's not cheap. And there are other things, but essentially what it does is create a VM with a container or containers, depending on what you need. And though that container or containers are your development environment, you click a button or you execute a command. Oh, I forgot to mention, yes, it could be GH as well, create, no, Codespaces create or something like that command. So there's the third option to create Codespaces. And now let's go to pros and cons. Let's talk about GitHub Codespaces. Should you use it, not use it, and so on and so forth. So, cons. Some of the negative things will depend on your situation. They might not be negative for you, might be negative for others. And the first one is this works only in GitHub. If you use GitHub, then great. This is not a negative point. If you're not using GitHub, then tough luck. You need to go somewhere else. And it's normal that GitHub Codespaces work only in GitHub. Nevertheless, that's a negative point. Works only in GitHub unless you don't care about everything else. What else? Oh yeah, there is no option for self-hosted version. Like Gitpod, for example, one of my favorites, if not the favorite. It can be SaaS-like or cloud as Codespaces is, but also I can run it in myself. It can be self-hosted, and that's very important because that might be cheaper, or that might allow me to use it because regulations might not allow me to use fully cloud, fully SaaS. Nevertheless, there is no self-hosted option, and that's not good. That's bad. There are some issues, like it didn't really work for me from GitHub CLI. You saw on my screen problems in Visual Studio Code Desktop and so on and so forth. There are problems with it. There are issues, some serious issues though, but it is still not fully publicly available, or maybe it is because GitHub Codespaces goes crazy in announcing their availability. Anyways, it's not fully done, so I will ignore the issues for now. What else? Oh yeah, there is no obvious way to get it to run in Kubernetes or with Kubernetes or in conjunction with Kubernetes. That's where other tools are much better choice, right? Because if your application is running Kubernetes, then you might want to have development environment in Kubernetes, not in a container, in a VM. And for that, you might want to use directly Kubernetes namespaces. You might want to use vCluster, or you might want to use something like Octeto. You might want to use Octeto. Octeto had a rough start, but it is getting really, really awesome. So you might want to use that one as well. And there is a video just as for others. What else? It's not polished, but that's okay. It's not yet generally available. And what else negative? Oh yeah, expensive. It's potentially expensive. So think about it, unless it is for private use, right? If it's for a company, then open your wallets. It's going to be expensive, but okay, maybe not for you. Now let's jump into positive things. What are the pros? There are actually a few. Individual development environments in cloud, that's obviously positive. That's absolutely awesome. That's the future. That's where we are going as industry. Our laptops should be dumb terminals, and we should be moving more and more things to cloud. And when I say cloud in this context, I do not necessarily mean cloud as in GitHub Codespaces cloud. It must be Azure, but cloud can be self-managed cloud in your data center. Anyways, what I want to say, it will move out of your laptops. So that's a positive thing. Individual dev environments in cloud. It can be created against a branch or a PR or basically on anything in GitHub, which is absolutely awesome. It works both with local and remote Visual Studio Code. So if you want to do it in a browser, great. If you want to do it in your local VS Code, great as well. That's absolutely amazing. It times out after 30 minutes of inactivity, so you will not be paying for the usage of something that you're not using. So when you're finished, you just stop working, and 30 minutes later, it shuts itself down and you're not paying for it anymore. And what else? And yes, it can be created from command line from GitHub CLI, which I love, or from Visual Studio Code or from browser. It works almost everywhere. That's also absolutely amazing. But that's the same as the previous point. So remove works with both local and remote Visual Studio Code. I'm repeating myself. But now comes the important thing. None of those positive things are unique to Codespaces, except integration with GitHub CLI. So all those things already exist for a while. You can see them in Gitpod, you can see them in Octeto, and a few other services. So there is hardly anything unique there is hardly anything special about GitHub Codespaces, except that that's the latest project and it just arrived while others exist for years now. But not being special, not being unique, not even being especially good compared to competition might not matter, because Codespaces is part of Microsoft, and that means that it can benefit from tight integration with GitHub, with VS Code, with other Microsoft products and services. So that's potentially future-wise very important thing, and that might allow Codespaces to step over the competition and come on top, even though it's not on the top right now. So if you would like me to summarize, if you would ask me to summarize, I would say, hey, it's nice, but it's neither revolutionary nor the top of the market segment. But that's what I said for GitHub Actions when it appears, when that project became available. At the very beginning, GitHub Actions were very limiting, but they became, the project, the service became better over time. Now today, even though GitHub Actions are nowhere near being the best, but it's the most convenient, one of the more convenient ways to run pipelines. So if GitHub Actions became huge, without being especially good, without being the best, but simply by being convenient and being part of GitHub, then that might be the future for GitHub Codespaces. What do you think? Let me know in the comments.